Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus mini-sodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive mini-sode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. This is a new series on immigration, and you are listening to episode 6. Thank you so much for joining for this series on immigration. It is such an important topic right now. It has been for the past couple of years especially, but right now, especially with COVID and everything going on, there's just a lot to think about when it comes to the conversation around immigration in the United States, but also in many countries around the world. And so I'm going to have some guests here on this series that are really important thinkers, activists, people who are immigrants themselves, people who are writing about immigration, lobbying in different spaces in government regarding immigration. We're going to talk about people in the faith community and what this means for people in the faith community. We're going to talk about what it means as a citizen of a nation, what it means to welcome the immigrant, what it means to feel welcomed yourself as an immigrant, and what are some practical ways we can help in both small and big ways, in systems being changed, and how we can let government leaders know what's important to us as a citizen, and just what it means to be a human being who cares for another human being. I'm just really excited that you're here. You're going to learn so much from my guests. You're going to be challenged, and you're going to come away from this having all kinds of conversations about what can we do differently. And I just ask that you open your mind and your heart and your soul to what you might learn, what invitation might be extended to you that wasn't extended to you before. And you're going to have new thoughts that you haven't had before. It may cause some difficult feelings to have to be worked through, but I think it's going to be really worth it. So I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really glad that you're going to listen to all my amazing speakers, and just thanks for showing up. If this is a series that you feel like others would benefit from, I would just encourage you to listen to it together and maybe have those conversations. Because it's really, I think, in working together with others where we can kind of brainstorm and innovate and come up with ways we can help together. It always feels like one person, it feels alone when you're the only one. But even two is really strong. There's just a power in coming together with others to try to solve these kind of problems and have these kind of discussions. So yeah, if there are people in your life that you're thinking of, please share this with them and let them know. This is going to be a really important space when we think through what it means to be an immigrant and what it means to welcome the immigrant. My first guest on this immigration series is my friend Alan Cross. Alan is currently the lead pastor at Petaluma Valley Baptist Church in Marin County in the Bay Area here in California. He's been here a little over a year, but it's a return to California for him because I met him well over 20 years ago when we were getting our master's degrees at the same time in Northern California. And he went on to pastor a Baptist church in Montgomery, Alabama, and just through his years there, began to really be involved in this whole conversation surrounding immigration. And he became very involved in helping to engage people around the conversations about welcoming immigrants and refugee neighbors, and working alongside with the evangelical immigration table. He's also done some lobbying at like state government level as well as national level in this conversation. He brings just so much information and wisdom. He's also worked engaged in some postgraduate studies at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in public administration. He has written a lot about this whole issue with immigration. He, in 2014, published a book, When Heaven and Earth Collide, Racism, Southern Evangelicals, and the Better Way of Jesus. And he's also written quite a bit in certain articles for the New York Times, for Religion News Service, Christianity Today, the Bulwark, Times, some other publications. So you can find him in all of those areas. But he really just brings a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge, mostly gained just by his own desire to learn and know more and to care for the immigrant and welcome the immigrant. He'll certainly talk about that today. And I just encourage you to open your ears and your heart, your mind to what he has to say, because I think it's very, very important. And he comes from, firsthand information as someone who has researched and written on this, but just out of a pastor's heart of love and care and concern, because of what he understands that the scriptures teach about what it means to welcome our immigrant neighbors around us. And so, yeah, just listen in, take notes, follow him online wherever he writes, and engage in this conversation with Alan. Here he is, my friend, Alan Cross. Alan.
Hey.
How are things going up in Marin County with the fires and near you?
Going okay. They have gotten better control of the fires, and evacuations slowed down. I think most people have been able to go back to their homes that have them. I mean, there were some structures that burned and some homes that burned. I know a pastor up in north of us who lost his home, and so he's working through that. Associate pastor of a church, and this church is supporting him and helping him and all that. There wasn't a large number like in previous years, but still enough for some folks to be affected. We served as a shelter last fall for the Kincaid fire, and had a bunch of people here, and we're on the list. We've worked through all the process with the city and the county to be an official shelter, and we've gone through the COVID protocols about how we would do it during COVID and all that kind of stuff. So this kind of I hope that we don't have any more fires. That's my prayer. But we weren't needed as a shelter, but we kind of went through all the process to be ready, and know what we need to do with because it's all different with COVID than it was before.
I know. It's like a double whammy.
yeah, where we just packed people in. So now we have to. So anyway, on our end, that was kind of a good dry run, I guess, to get ready. But we weren't needed. So that's good.
That's good news. Yeah.
But there's still a lot of smoke. As they're fighting it, the wind shifted yesterday, and our whole lower valley, Petaluma Valley, where we are, was just totally covered in smoke. So yeah, still going through that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to what you're saying down here in the Silicon Valley. We had fires we're in Santa Clara, so we had fires on the west of us and on the east of us here. And it was pretty smoky for a while. We have, people we know personally that lost their homes in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and people that had to evacuate that the fires got really close with. And we've been trying to do some things to bless firefighters, which incidentally is not easy to do, apparently, because they have a lot of restrictions on what they can receive, which I understand is really good, because you don't want a firefighter receiving, anything that feels like a bribe that would make them want to choose one house over another, because they do have to make kind of, really hard decisions, which are not easy to make. And then also during COVID, it's, there's a lot of protocols on what kind of food you can give and, that kind of thing. But anyway, we found some creative ways to find opportunities to put some supplies in some hotels in Scotts Valley in the lobby where firefighters just kind of come in and take what they need. So that's been kind of nice. And then we've been able to bless some evacuees in the area as well. And I think it's going to be increasing in terms of the need in that way, just because COVID was already such a hard hitting thing. And, homelessness is already such an issue in our area. And then additionally, all of this. But yeah, it's just so much going on. Who knew we were going to have a pandemic and all these crazy fires at the same time? It's been very challenging, but it's a good opportunity to reach out to people. But anyway, what we're talking about today is immigration. So thank you so much for coming on. When I think of immigration, there's several people that come to mind that are really leading the way in some really important areas. And you're, of course, in that list. And so I have listeners kind of from all around the world that listen to this podcast, and a significant number here in the U.S. And so I know that you've really done a lot in the last many years to help advocate for immigrants and help people, especially in the church, to understand kind of what our role is, and both politically and also just as Christians in the church. So I guess my first question would be, how would you really describe what's going on right now with immigration in the United States?
Yeah. First of all, I guess kind of start with myself and how I got into this, just because that will give context.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an immigrant. I'm not the child of immigrants. I mean, at some point in my ancestry, I can go back to the 1850s and find immigrant and probably refugee ancestors, based on how we would define refugees. But just over the last decade or so, just became aware of the plight of immigrants as a white Southern Baptist evangelical pastor in Alabama, from the South with heritage that goes back several hundred years, and so kind of if you look at demographics and if you look at all of the things that sometimes people think lead into these, areas of interest. This was not something that directly affected me in the sense of, I'm speaking about this because it's my family, or because I'm directly affected, but I felt like it did affect me because of the role of the church and because of the ministry of the church and what God commands us to do. And so, just the ministry of receiving people, which is really important. And we can talk more about that later, that I've come to the point that in the context of mission, that receiving is just about as important as going and sending. And there's a whole biblical teaching there that we've missed, which I'm trying to recover. So there's that. So just the idea of hospitality and welcoming and of seeing the plight of others and seeing what others are going through, and the just the ethic of who we are as a people and how we welcome people and how we see people and how we care for people, how we talk about people, how there are people who in groups that demagogue against others and create really negative perspectives or lift up negative perspectives, which then creates a lot more conflict and then people who come to us for help are shut out or rejected, or all of these things. This has been a big swirl for the past 5 or 6 years that's been just growing in our country. And just seeing the need to tell a better story, which is something I talk about all the time. How can the church step in and be the church and love people and welcome people in the midst of kind of this movement that has been growing, especially in Western nations, against migrants and against refugees and against immigrants from other countries, people coming, because we think about what they might take from us and what we might lose, as opposed to what we can gain from sharing relationships with each other. So all of that's been going on, and all that has then affected our view of public policy, and something that should be pretty uncontroversial overall, as far as how we see people and welcome people and talk about people and care for people, has become kind of a major. It's moved into the realm of politics in the sense that that people are using the issue to fight against others and to kind of gain ground for themselves and for their agendas. And so I've just tried to step into that, not from a partisan political perspective in the sense of who has power, but more in a prophetic state from a Christian perspective of how we see people and how we care about others that God cares about. And, so wading into the political sphere and all these ideological battles with the message of the cross and the sacrificial love of Christ to say, this is how we should see people and care about people, especially if you call yourself Christian. But even if you don't, these things are important, just for how we live. And I speak as a Christian, I speak as a follower of Jesus, but I'll speak to anybody and with anybody along these lines, because all this matters how we live life on the planet, right? So that's just kind of an overall context of how I got into this, but I'm not sure if I specifically answered your question, but that's just kind of setting the context. So
yeah, it's so helpful for us to understand the background, because I think part of what we'll talk about today deals with stereotypes. And so some people might have a stereotype that those who advocate for immigrants must, be a recent immigrant themselves. But you're talking about your family. The immigration would have happened many generations ago, and yet you still, as a follower of Jesus who wants to lead in the faith community, this affects you. And I think those are important things to talk about that we often don't talk about, right?
Yeah, right. Because maybe not half, but probably at least 40% of the immigration conversation is about receiving people. It's about host people where they live and the attitudes that they have towards people who come, and that is often left out. And so in that vacuum, it's filled with people it can be filled with people with really nefarious agendas and real antagonism against immigrants, and that fills up the space, right?
Yeah.
And so we need to fill the space of receiving with people of goodwill and people who are influenced by Jesus and the Bible. And it talks a lot about receiving, and it's actually a major aspect of mission, is how we welcome and receive people. That unfortunately we've just about totally neglected. It's starting to be recovered a little bit, but it's not something that many of us are aware of. So
yeah. Well, yeah. I love that whole posture, and I do totally agree with you that as we look at some of those verses, both in the Old and New Testaments and the scriptures, that they're often misinterpreted right now. And I just think it's true that we need to recover that. And so I'm really interested to know your work. Like you said, you're a pastor. You were in Alabama for a while. Now you're back in California again for a year or so. And you work both within the church, but I know that you've also done some things to help, both state legislatures and state, senators and also at the national level in DC. So how do you describe the role that you feel like you should play both within the church and kind of the political sphere? And I know you also do some writing as well. So how would you say your role is in terms of the work that you're doing on behalf of immigrants is looking?
Yeah. Well, I was, more active, I guess, as an advocate in between pastorates. And so I pastored in Montgomery for about 15 or 16 years in a Baptist church there. And then I began to work as an advocate and had a platform with our local Baptist association and worked a lot on racial reconciliation work in Montgomery, giving city tours and speaking about the book I had written on that topic. And then also going around the Southeast and, working with multiple groups. Bibles, Badges of Business was a group that I worked with as a Southeast a coordinator for that, and the Evangelical Immigration Table. I worked with them and working with Southern Baptists and just church groups to really help people kind of have a perspective on how can we welcome people from a biblical perspective. And so there was a policy perspective on that where we would just take pastors and we would speak with congressmen and we would just talk about what churches were doing to welcome people, what the Bible said about it. I would go to DC and meet with congressional and Senate staffs and pray with them and just talk about not specifically like here's a bill or here's a policy that has to happen, but the overall attitude that we should have, seeing people as made in God's image, caring about children and families, kind of an overall view of how we value immigrants and refugees, and then encouraging our policymakers to take those values as biblical values into the perspective on how they write and pass legislation. So it isn't, in the sense where you say this bill is the bill that has to happen or this person has to be elected. It isn't that at all. It's more of how can we speak into and influence and reflect from a value perspective. And both Republicans and Democrats and people on all sides were always very open to that discussion, and sometimes there would be legislation that would come up that would just totally, or enact executive order, or just a policy proposal that would really violate what Scripture said. And so we would speak against that. We'd say, hey, this doesn't fit. Not that America's Israel or America's a church, but as Christians, we have the ability to witness to the state, in the country we live in. So we would speak from a Christian perspective. And so, and then when I came back to pastor here in California, I stepped away from a lot of that as far as just the direct advocacy and that work, and have shifted to pastoring, but just continuing to write and to speak about the values behind it, and the posture of the church and the posture of Christians towards the vulnerable, and how that should influence the political sphere, but not try to control it. Or I really am working hard to not just land in partisan camps, because we should be able to speak to all sides from what Scripture says, and it seems like Jesus did that.
Yeah, that's good. So when you've had a lot of interaction with different immigrants, you've also been advocating for them, and you've written about the situation in America. So I think there's a lot of stereotypes, I mentioned this earlier, about what it means to be an immigrant. How would you describe what it means to be an immigrant in the United States of America?
Well, I mean, it depends on where you're coming from and what resources you have when you come, what kind of networks you have. I mean, you might have on one end, entrepreneur from India who has lots of resources and is coming to start a business in Silicon Valley, or a tech worker who can step right in with a job and make a lot of money right from the very beginning because of their skill set. And so that's on one end. You have students, international students. They're not immigrants or non-immigrants, but they would come in and possibly transition into a job if they could get the right visa. So you have one end of things, which is one type of experience, where you might face some opposition and some people who don't really want you here because of certain biases. Then on the other end, up until recently, our asylum system has basically been stopped. But you would have a mother and a child fleeing violence and war and abuse and all types of horrendous things in El Salvador or Guatemala or wherever it might be in the Northern Triangle, who makes the trek through Mexico and presents herself at the border for asylum, and then comes in with no resources and goes through a process. And so, and then you have refugees and you have people who have fled war and they've gone through a vetting process. So immigration, the whole idea of migration, refugees, asylum seekers, immigrants, it's so broad. And it took me quite some time of study, starting in the mid 2010s, even before, even while I was pastor of my previous church. It kind of became my hobby to just read and sit up, at 10, 11 o'clock at night, just kind of reading articles and journals and books and, everything to try to, because the big misconception about immigration that 99% of people have is they read an article online and they think they know about it and they think they know what it is. And then they begin to speak authoritatively, and then they begin to speak with really strong opinions based on what they think. And almost all of it's wrong. And I didn't understand that until I really began to study. I had no idea how much I didn't know. I had no idea how many variables there were, how many different experiences, how many different approaches and visas and all of these different things, and where you come from and what color your skin is and what your national background. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, an immigrant from England coming today has a very different experience than an immigrant from Cameroon, or Sudan or someplace like that. The way that they're accepted here and the opportunities they have, and so it's a very broad thing. And there are relational networks. There are places people go because they have family members, because there might be somebody that can help them. And then communities begin to build in certain places like South Nashville, as an example, where Kurdish refugees were placed, and then more Kurds began to move there. And Montgomery, where we were, a Hyundai plant was built, and so the Korean business executives came and with the Hyundai plant, Korean workers came, and so then Korean restaurant owners began to move to Montgomery because there's a Korean community there that they can service, and then more Koreans began to come. And so, over the past 15 years, you have this growing Korean community in Montgomery, Alabama, because Hyundai has a plant there. And then more and more people move. So that's how, that's kind of how it happens. So really broad experiences for people, depending on where they're from, what resources they come with, where they move in the United States. You've had over the past 25 years, you've had a lot of immigrants move to the Southeast, where I worked and where I lived and where I'm from. And that's what's created a lot of the backlash today, because those weren't heavy immigrant areas, but there were places that needed workers, and the cost of living was low, and they were all the, it really started with ironically, it all started with primarily with the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. There's a whole story there, and then also the poultry plants and agricultural work in rural Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi and places like that. And then you had the auto plants that came in. And so little by little, the South has actually had more, I think like 50%, almost 50% of all new immigrants in the United States over the past 20 years came to the Southeast or came to the U.S. South, which includes Texas and Florida. And so backlash developed. And so, I was there, and I'm looking, well, this is where all of our churches, I mean, not all of our churches, but as a Southern Baptist, this is where our churches are. And the Bible says we should receive people, welcome people. And are we doing that? And so, working with churches to do a better job at receiving people. So there's all of these dynamics, both on the receiving end, as well as the coming, where people go, what kind of resources they come with, where they come from. It is a massively complex issue, but it touches on every single facet of American life. And when you speak into that from a Christian perspective, you're speaking into everything, as it turns out.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And I know that you've written this book a while back called When Heaven and Earth Collide, around the issues of racism. And it seems as though when we're talking about immigration and when we're talking about the stereotypes in America about what it means to be an immigrant, that we're dealing with stereotypes, but occasionally we're also dealing with, full on racism. And I know that you have understood that that's been alive and well within the American church, the whole issue of racism. And certainly this year, the curtain has been pulled back for a lot of people that didn't recognize that has been there all along. So I know that one of your phrases is telling a better story. And so when we think about some of the misconceptions people have about immigrants, what would you like to clear up for the people listening?
Yeah, I think, it depends on what the person's attitude is, but if a lot of people with an anti-immigrant view are very afraid of what the migrant, the refugee, however people come, the foreigner, they're afraid of what they will take from them and what they'll lose, what might be lost with them being here. And that often is not how the immigrant sees. They're coming to work, and they're coming to live and to build families and to be a part of America. I mean, immigrants, I've never met an immigrant who came here because they didn't love America, I mean, they want to be here, and the allure, you've lived overseas. I've traveled overseas extensively for relatively long periods of time in many countries. And I've talked to people, and there's this, I walk in as an American, and people want to talk to me. They want to know about our country. There's such a, I know that, things have changed a little bit the last, however long amount of time. But even as I traveled overseas and people didn't like things the American government was doing, they still wanted to talk to Americans. And I was always received very warmly and, very much welcomed, because I took interest to be with them, and I was there. And so, there was a desire to learn more about America, because America is a very powerful, rich nation, and that has a lot of influence. And there, it is a dream for so many people to come here and to live. Not everyone that's another misconception. A lot of times people think that everyone around the world wants to move to and live in America. That's not the case.
No,
if our borders were completely open, the whole world would not move here.
Right.
A lot of people have no desire to move here. They're interested in our country, but they have no desire to move here. And so that's, that's a false belief. But the people who do come self-select, just like our ancestors did. They pick up everything. They're ambitious people. They're hardworking people. They're people who want to make a go of things. No one comes here that I've ever met who comes here who wants to just sit and do nothing. People come here to work because this is a land of opportunity, and they want to make the most of that. In some ways, the immigrants who come here are more American than many of the American native born, because they buy into our values of a freedom and opportunity and liberty and hard work, and they know what those values are. They've studied, they've learned, and they aspire to a better life. And many of them are very religious. The majority of immigrants and refugees who come here are Christians, coming from countries where perhaps Christianity is persecuted, or Christianity is not the favored religion. And so they come here and they look for churches and they want to be a part of churches. And so, there's so many ideas that immigrants are coming to harm us, whereas I began to learn, and am totally 100% convinced, that the vast majority of immigrants only make our lives better and only increase our quality of life, both in our communities as well as our churches. Our churches would be so much stronger if we would really pivot to the immigrants who've come to us, both who aren't Christians or aren't affiliated with churches, and we reach out to them in ministry and mission and evangelism and care and just partnering in our communities. But also for those who are Christians. Like last year, for example, Lori, I went to the border multiple times. We had 1 million migrants who came to our border over the course of last year seeking asylum, most of them, and looking for help. But so many of them were with children and families. As I went up and down the border, I was in El Paso and I was in Tijuana, went to Nogales, and then I heard from people in Texas and from ministries. Everywhere I went, I heard that the majority of the migrants coming were evangelical Christians, actually. And our churches in America, I was banging the drum as loud as I could. I was yelling at the top of my lungs, however I could. We need to help support. We need to help the churches at the border who are receiving people, because ICE was turning migrants over to the churches for processing, like for a couple of days, and they were overwhelmed. Your mom was one of the first ones. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. In Las Cruces, she was one of the first ones to tell me this, and I began to investigate it and found it was true up and down the border. What she said was that the majority were evangelical Christians, and it wasn't just her. I mean, I heard this from multiple places, and actually was able to work with Sophia Lee with World Magazine, who interviewed her, and she wrote an article talking about this as well. But just the perception, these are foreigners, and therefore they're not of our faith, they're not of our aspiration, and they're people to be rejected. That's a stereotype that's just totally false. And you can find that out just by getting to know some people. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I think it's important.
I think that there's so much people that are going to be listening to this podcast won't understand unless we tell them, people like you that have been on the border and you've seen and you've talked to people and you've seen it all firsthand. So many people don't get that privilege. And so I think it's important for a voice like yours to speak into it as a pastor, but also just as a human being that cares for other human beings. Right. And so, I would just love for you to speak to those who are listening, who have probably been seeing some of the rhetoric, are afraid immigrants are going to take their jobs. They're afraid they're going to cause our nation to be more dangerous. And some of those stereotypes that we talked about earlier. And a lot of that is being, amped up, I think, right now during this, leading up to the election, because I think fear does motivate voters. And it's actually good or bad, it's a motivator, right? Mm-hmm. And I know my kids, they're on YouTube and they have been seeing these ads coming in from a certain political campaign that are saying things like, immigrants are going to take your jobs and they're dangerous. And my kids, they don't see immigrants that way, mainly because we've been raised in another country and we've been immigrants most of our lives in other places. And we've always been, like you said, as Americans, well received, but also because they know the work that their grandma does. Mm-hmm. My mom mm-hmm. on the border, and the way we talk about immigrants is different than what they're seeing on political ads on YouTube. But I would love for you to speak to the people who are listening right now that may just have a little bit of openness in their heart to have that mindset shift. And just talk to us about why it's important to care for immigrants as a person of faith. Like, why is that so important to you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, truth is really important, for us. And, you know, it isn't falling into political trap to say what has happened. I mean, it was very clear in 2018, before the midterms, that the Republican Party and Trump were running, and they were putting out there the migrant caravans, as being these hordes of people who were just going to do horrible things, and so they were using that as and they were very public about it. I mean, this isn't any type of false conclusion. That has been since 2015, and actually before, with outlets like Breitbart and other far right outlets who, I mean, this has been on purpose, and this has been said over and over again, and people have said it themselves. The whole approach against immigrants has been a very calculated, purposeful political move, to put forward this idea of nationalism, and that we need to protect ourselves, from these people and people from these countries, and things like that. And so, I'm a lifelong conservative. I've had always voted Republican, and I don't mind saying that. I mean, we're in America, and so we make choices, and that's my bent. That's my political bent, and I'm a theological conservative as well. Those two things aren't at all the same, but just to kind of say what camp I've been in. But as time has gone on, and as I've seen these things metastasize and grow and very publicly be put forward, I have to say, on this issue, I really totally disagree. It doesn't fit with what's happening. It doesn't fit with what the Bible says. It doesn't fit with how we should see people. And so, either I'm going to be captive by a political ideology, or I'm going to speak to it where it differs from my faith, which should be my North Star. Like, I mean, that's what should define me, not my politics. And my politics should be shaped by my faith, not the other way around. And so, on this issue, the way that immigrants have been, really demonized, in some significant ways, that's something that we have to push against. And I think we have to say that's wrong, and then vote how you want to. I mean, there are lots of reasons why people vote. There isn't just one issue. People make that choice as they see fit. But when there are certain issues, like the way people are treated, the way people are spoken about, and the way people are lumped together and categorized, and then cast with aspersion, when you meet people, I remember going to a church in El Paso last year at the height of the migrant crisis, and I was talking to the pastor outside, and they said, oh yeah, they gave me like some stuff to carry in. Supplies were being delivered, and so I had a handful of stuff. And I opened the door, and I wasn't expecting to see what I saw when I opened the door. The sanctuary was nothing but cots. They had taken their sanctuary and put cots everywhere. And there were migrants who had just come in that day, and they were sitting there, and there were men, women, and children, families, babies, and there was not a single sound. Like, the children just stared. The babies didn't even cry. I mean, I'm seeing it right now as I think about this. The people were exhausted, completely wiped out. Just tired, dirty. Had been through who knows what, and they were just sitting there and staring. And I turned the corner and I looked into the sanctuary. And I just gasped, and it just like floored me what I saw, because I wasn't prepared for what I saw. And I thought, these are the people that we're saying are coming to kill us, or coming to rob us, or coming to take from us, or they're a danger. These are desperate people. These are babies. These are children. We cannot talk about people this way, and so, in the midst of a political season, which it seems like we haven't left the last two political seasons, right? Is there ever not a political season?
No,
how we talk about these people, and how we receive them and love them, really ties into the witness of the church, and I would love to, to talk about ministry. That's a question that comes up, because I think we're seeing this all wrong. We're missing a massive opportunity as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, let's talk about that. What are some practical ways that we could help immigrants now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously building relationships, being present, in areas that they're dealing with and struggling. And this was, in Montgomery, and again, as I traveled around the Southeast, I identified who are the churches that are working with immigrants, ESL programs, and just different ministries. We have ministry centers in our town that were helping with just practical needs with people, but it goes from like the very poor all the way to building relationships and cultural affinity. As I got to know Indian business owners in Montgomery, and realized that they were having cultural festivals, and then we had if you remember when the New Zealand shooting happened, I was there was a gathering at the mosque that had just opened up in Montgomery. There was only one mosque there. And so as a Baptist pastor, I went to grieve because the Muslim community in Montgomery was very much affected by what happened. And so I went there and was there with people from all over the world. And you talk to people and you build relationships and you get to know people. And then you tell people very clearly, I'm here because of Jesus. I'm here because I'm a follower of Christ. And he loves people, and there's good news. And so you end up with conversations and you see the gospel go to people, who aren't Christians, because you didn't stand away from them, and because you didn't put up barriers that you weren't going to have a relationship, with them. And so, but it happens in a very natural way through friendships and through relationships and through just getting to know people and caring about what they care about and care about what hurts them. And, being aware of the struggles that they're having in a new community. And like I said, last year we had 1 million migrants come from all over the world, not just from Central America, but from all over the world, from countries everywhere. And the church, by and large, in America, just missed it. There was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of talk about it. There was a lot of, this was a couple of years in a row with, child separation from families and all these different things. But we saw it politically, and there was this idea that if you try to help or even minister, that you're taking political sides. And that wasn't true at all. It was just being Christians. It was just loving people and receiving people. So churches at the border did a great job. Your mother did an incredible job. Churches in the El Paso sector did amazing, as well as Tijuana and, McAllen, Texas, and all the way up and down the border did incredible, but they should have been helped. Like we should have, the churches in the interior should have been resourcing and helping and coming behind them. And there should have just been a mass movement that didn't take place, and that was a big part of my concern last year. But the same in our communities. I mean, we have people who've come to our cities within the last 5 years, that relationships can still be built and they can still be welcome. They can be invited to our homes. They can be, so much can happen if we would just open our eyes and see. And so I talk about something that I've written about is the SPEAK acronym, for example. So Proverbs 31:8-9 says that we're to speak on behalf of those who have no voice. So we should speak for the vulnerable and for the oppressed. And so this is just, I'm not big on acronyms. Like I never do acronyms. It's, my brain doesn't work the way, but one day I actually thought of one. And so I was so proud. So based on, yeah, I know. Right. So based on Proverbs 31:8-9, the S is for see, that we would see the immigrants in our midst, because lots of times they're invisible. We just bypass them. And we don't see their communities. We don't see, what they're doing, and we might go to a restaurant and get something to eat of a food we like, but then we just kind of go on, and then the second thing is to pray. And I put see before pray, because once we see things, and we should always ask God to give us eyes to see, but then we can pray as we really see, what's going on. And then we can pray for people. And the next thing is to engage. So after we see them, after we pray for them, that we engage with the gospel and with good works, with love, that we find out what their issues are and we come alongside them. And then the next thing is to advocate or to act on their behalf. As we engage them, we build relationships, we become very much aware of things that they're dealing with. There was a Mexican immigrant couple that I went to visit in Montgomery one day, and they were very poor, and I went to their house to check on them after something had happened, and we were with them, and the husband, he comes to me and he shows me a ticket that they had gotten when they went to get a tag renewed, and the cop pulled them over, and the ticket was for they had done nothing wrong, but he asked for their license, and they were undocumented, so they didn't have a license, and so he gave him a ticket for driving without a license. Well, there's no way he could have known that, and the policy in our city was to not profile, and local police have no authority over immigration. They hadn't committed other crimes, done anything wrong, but this police officer was profiling, and so I was friends with the chief of police, and I went to him and I showed him. I took a picture of the ticket and I showed him, and he thanked me, and he said he would address it right away. And so he then goes to the whole department and says, we will not profile our Hispanic neighbors. We're not going to pull them over just because you see a Hispanic couple driving a car. And so, so through, I mean, that's just one example with the relationships we have to leverage those relationships. And that's the concept behind privilege, right? So if you have relationships, you have privilege, do you use it for others? And it's not that you shouldn't have it. I'm glad I had it. I'm glad I had relationships, but I shouldn't just use it for myself. I should use it on behalf of others who don't have that. And then the last thing is K, which is keep going. Because once you see, once you pray, once you engage, once you advocate and act, then you wake up tomorrow and you have to do it all over again. And you get to do it all over again because the people are right in front of you. And God uses all that, and then movements start, and then churches start. We were able to start a church amongst immigrants in Montgomery, building relationships and doing that very thing. And so it just grows and grows. And so that's kind of what I encourage people to do, and how I go forward with it.
Wow, that's so good. And I love the story of how you used your privilege to help that couple. And I think a lot of people feel, with all the conversation that's going on right now about systemic racism and a lot of things, that it just, people feel kind of sometimes defeated. Like, what is something they could practically do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think your example of, like, you know someone, which is a privilege, and as a white man, and being able to use that relationship to help others is just a small thing that's a really big thing for others because of the way that, dealt with the system.
Yeah.
So when we think about, like, there's a lot of different ways, like we mentioned earlier, to immigrate into the U.S. system. We have here in Silicon Valley, actually in Sunnyvale, where I'm working, we have a very large number of H-1B visas, which, in the recent months have been, there's been a shift because of the current, administration on some of that. There's also like spouse visas, there's student visas that we mentioned earlier. There's, the whole asylum seeker situation has obviously changed. There's so many ways to immigrate into America. And so, like, what are your thoughts about the current immigration policies and processes? So if people are trying to figure out how to make those systemic changes as people of faith, or not, maybe some people listening have no faith background at all, but what are some practical ways people could think about this whole immigration process in our nation? And what are some things you wish could change that we could help advocate for?
Yeah. Well, I mean, very honestly speaking, the whole policy and approach toward immigration in our country right now is none. Don't do it. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, that's just what it is. And it's been a war on obviously on illegal immigration. That's been since day one. It's been a complete dismantling of the refugee resettlement process system from top to bottom, where refugee resettlement has been stopped. And COVID is used as an example. I wrote a piece for the Bulwark, just I guess recently, not too long ago, about refugee resettlement and how it's basically ended. You have that, but then also legal immigration. Legal immigration is being slashed dramatically. And COVID is being used for part of this, but that doesn't really make sense, because you could be tested and be shown to not have COVID and then be allowed to go through the process to come in, so it isn't like COVID is a hidden disease that people can't figure out. And so therefore you have to keep people from other countries away, but it's, and then the asylum process has been dismantled as well. So every, and then there was a move against international students too. And so there's been pushback on all of these things. There have been advocates who have spoken against all of these decisions that have been made. But the overall goal is to have as few immigrants come in as possible, until there's an industry that really says, hey, we need workers, and our industry is about to go under if we don't get more workers. And so then there'll be, like ag workers, there's been a movement for more ag workers to come in because farmers and dairy and these industries have to have them, and they can't get them from American workers. And so, you'll see that from time to time kind of emerge and be like, oh, we're bringing in more workers on this certain visa because we have to have them. But that's from lobbying from those industries, which is important. And Silicon Valley does a lot of that lobbying too. But the H-1B visa has been demonized as against American workers. And so that's become problematic. but just overall, just to kind of know that every avenue of immigration is basically opposed, even legal immigration, and that you're going to have to kind of claw and fight tooth and nail on every single aspect to make sure that things aren't happening that are opposed to immigrants. So that sounds harsh and it sounds partisan, but it's just a reflection on what's happening. It's not really any type of ideological judgment. It's just pretty objectively true. This is what's been going on for the last, almost 4 years.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it helps just to have it said with such clarity, because I think there is so much rhetoric out there, and there's so many different news sources that are not being careful about the kind of news that they report, and we're hearing stories that are very distorted about immigrants. And for the most part, like you said, I think the immigrants I've met in America are just some of the most lovely people, mm-hmm. and really add to our nation. My mom and I, we have family on my mom's side that live in Canada. They live in Victoria, and my mom and I took a trip together, the two of us, to go visit some of our relatives up there a few years back. And we were in Vancouver at the end, and we were in a taxi going back to the airport, and our taxi driver was talking about how much he loved immigrants in Vancouver, because they bring their food, and they have all this amazing food in Vancouver, and then they bring their families to join in and adopt the Canadian lifestyle. And as a Canadian, he's very proud to be Canadian. He thinks it's has a good reputation around the world, and he's right. And he's like, for people to want to come to this nation and become a part of our lifestyle, and raise their families in our schools and learn about our way of life and adopt our way of life, it's just the greatest honor. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh man, they were at the border receiving people with blankets coming into Canada at a time when they were being very rejected in the United States. And I just thought, oh, what a beautiful perspective. I wish more people could see that side of what immigrants really actually do bring to our culture, and how it enriches us, right, as mm-hmm. Americans. So I think I would love for you already shared a story about this couple that you advocated for that was pulled over by the cop. But is there another story that you could think of an immigrant that really just captures what you feel like Americans need to know about immigrants right now?
Yeah, there are a lot of stories. Gosh, that's what I did for several years. I would just go around places and collect stories and meet people and connect people. And but there was this one lady that sticks out. And I got an interview and a video interview with her. I'm going back and I watched it from time to time. But I was at this little church. It was down in South Alabama, and it was it's a town. I won't name names or anything like that. Just but it was it's a small town that was co-located with this pretty big poultry plant. And so there were a lot of immigrants from Central America and from Mexico who had moved to this town. And there was a church working with them, doing really great work. And there was this church that had been formed on the edge of a pretty large trailer park that backed up to fields in the woods and everything. And so the trailer park had all of these trailers, and it had dirt roads, and you walk into the trailer park, and then very quickly it's like you're in Guatemala or southern Mexico or Honduras, because everything changes. Spanish is the only language spoken. There were Mixtec immigrants from the southern hills of Mexico living amongst people from Central America. There were chickens, running around, little children barefoot. And I mean, as I've traveled to these other places, I'm like, okay, this is a different world. All of a sudden, you could smell the smells of people cooking. It's just all of this. And so there was a little church that formed. It was Alabama Baptist had a missionary that was working these areas and these towns with the poultry plants, just like a foreign missionary would, as far as going in and building relationships and starting ministries and churches and things. And so I went there one night. I'd been there several times, and I went there one night, and I met this woman. And her story, she was from, I think she was from Guatemala, if I remember correctly. Her her mother left years before. Her father was dead. She was in a very, very difficult community. her mother had come to Alabama to work in the poultry plants. She was 8 years old, and she was sent to live with her mother, who she didn't really know. Her mother left when she was like 1 year old, and her grandmother had raised her. But her grandmother sent her to live with her mother. She shows up. She lives with her mother for several years. She goes to school. At 12 years old, she's taken out of school and she's sent to work in the poultry plant at 12 years old.
Wow.
And that was the end of school for her. Now, this is America. This is the United States. And this poultry plant hired this child to come work. These are the types of things that are happening, right? It's it's off the books. It's in the shadows of these small southern towns. And this would have been 18 years ago, because when I met her 2 years ago, she was 28, so 12.
Wow.
So 16 years before that. So yeah, this was in the 2000s. Okay. So that's it with school. She, meets somebody. She has several children. By this time, she is 28. She has 5 children. She's undocumented because she was just sent here, smuggled in. Her mother, I believe, passed. Her grandmother passed. She has no family to go back in Guatemala. She's an undocumented immigrant with 5 U.S. citizen children and no husband who's also abandoned her. And she just works. She does, housework. She works where she can. Very, very poor. The year before that, she was met by some ladies there who were volunteering with the ministry from the local Baptist church, and she was led to Christ and baptized. And so she's being discipled and growing in the Lord, and very strongly articulates a faith in Jesus. But the life that she told me, and the childhood that she told me about, and what she went through was just absolutely heartbreaking. And her story was confirmed and verified and everything. And so this is somebody who is considered to be, quote, an illegal immigrant. And there's no way for her to get legal. There's no process that she can go through, but she has nowhere to go. Yeah. She was sent here. She didn't choose to come. She was forced to come. She didn't graduate high school, so she wouldn't qualify for DACA. She wouldn't qualify for all of the different things. What do we do with this stateless person who lives amongst us? Well, the local Baptist church there, and this church plant in the migrant community, in the immigrant community there, they've received her, they've loved her, they've shared Christ with her. But why can't the government that we live in make a way for her to be not for the rest of her life in this situation, or fearing deportation to a place that she doesn't even know and couldn't support herself? And so those are the types of things, those are the stories that fueled me, where I said, okay, this isn't about politics. This is about people, and how can we find a way to help these people in desperate need. And also, as churches, how do we receive them and minister to them, because they're souls that God made in his image and loves, and there are ways that we can reach out to them. So that's a story from a couple of years ago that I asked her if I could do a video, and I did, and I posted it. I didn't share a name or where I was, but I wanted people to hear the story. And so those are in there. I have a bunch more stories like that of people that I've met that just fuel me to continue to speak on their behalf.
Yeah. Wow. It's so heartbreaking, and it feels like there's such a system stacked against someone like that. And yet it's so beautiful to know that church has come around her. And it does give me hope that there are roles that the local church and local people of faith can a role they can play. But it does still leave that question of, what are the systems around us and ways we can help in those systems? And so what would you say would be the biggest system that we should try to work toward helping change, that we could help? What would you say to that?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that, it all starts with seeing and receiving, if you want to talk about really how to make change, because once you're in relationship with people, and once you're willing to, and this is as an American citizen, not just as a white person per se, but as a citizen, every American citizen has a lot of power, to be able to speak, and to be able to advocate, and to be able to write, and talk, and and then vote. And one thing is I talk about this, and I'm not concerned. Like, we should be able to talk about issues and not be worried about if people think you're trying to advocate for one politician or another. I'm actually not. You make that decision. That's up to you.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be captive to, I can't talk about immigrants because there's one party that opposes them, one party that accepts them. And then people think that I'm promoting the party that accepts them. I'm not doing that either. There are lots of reasons why people vote. This is just one issue. And right. The vote, our vote, while it's really important, shouldn't be the only thing we do on this.
Right.
Like we have 4 years in between presidential elections, 2 years in between congressional elections. The vote is something you do on one day. The way you live, your lifestyle, what you speak about, what you care about, that's what you do every day. And we shouldn't be pushed into a corner where our vote defines us. And then everything we do in between that time, well, are you saying we shouldn't vote for so-and-so? I'm not even thinking about who you vote for. I'm talking about lives and what matters. And these policies that are stacked against them should be changed. And the ones who have the most power to change President Trump's policies and what has emerged as the new Republican, because 7-8 years ago, Republicans were pretty pro-immigrant, and they had a lot of pro-immigrant policies, and they were very friendly towards immigrants. This has all been very recent, but the people who have the most potential to change this on behalf of immigrants are Mr. Trump supporters. It is the president's supporters. It's the people who go meet with him. It's evangelical leaders who go to the White House. They have the biggest voice. And if the president knew that evangelicals, for example, which is his base, if he really heard from the church that we support you for a lot of other reasons, but we do not support your position on immigration, we want you to change, I think he would, because he has no other base. And so there's an enormous amount of power and also responsibility on this. So it isn't about who you vote for, it's about what you say in between. And so the culture of rejection, the culture of alienation, and of promote, protect, and defend my way of life, and seeing people as a threat. These people threaten me and I have to protect my way of life. Therefore, I have to push away from them. Therefore, the political views that say these people should be rejected are the ones that I adopt to protect me. That's a false narrative. We can say that our way of life is enhanced by people from other countries if we receive them and if they adopt. And I think what your friend in Vancouver said, or the driver you're talking to, what he said was really important. Immigrants also have a responsibility when they come to a country to integrate into that country and to integrate into that culture. And so often, especially first generation immigrants, continue to isolate, and part of that is because of fear, and that's on us as host people, that we need to build those bridges and receive them and welcome them. And when they don't feel received, they close up. But as we do that, there's also a responsibility for the immigrant to welcome those relationships. It doesn't mean that they get rid of their culture, that they or that they don't carry on with customs and things like that. But we do need to constantly be building those bridges on both sides. And that's really important, to tell that story that we can work together and we can coexist and thrive together. And then we speak to the system that opposes that. That is basically based on fear and concern that these people take something from us. You asked, what is the one thing that we can speak into? That is it. It's this overall cultural, fear, xenophobia, which is fear of the other. And the biblical word for hospitality is philoxenia, which is love for the other. So hospitality counters xenophobia, and we can go a long way with that. And that isn't a political discussion. That is not who you vote for. That is about how we live in between, and taking that view into that will make a massive difference. And then there are policy issues, and then there are things we can advocate for, and we can talk about what helps people and what's good for people. And that's a lot of stuff that flows out of that care and concern for the other.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about and a lot of practical ways we can help, both in small, micro ways and in macro ways with systems. And just the stories that you shared are just so compelling. They give us real faces, real people to think about, that, we can ignore what's going on if we don't consider ourselves to be immigrants, even though in America, unless you're a full-blooded Native American of some tribe, you pretty much are. We can see ourselves as outside of this whole camp and not get involved. But I just think you've shown us today that even a little bit of light can dispel darkness, and it doesn't take a lot, but it just takes, determining within yourself that you're going to be that kind of person. You're going to take that step, because we don't want to live in fear. And the opposite of fear is love. Love casts out fear. And if we can be the kind of people that love and receive, we'll get so much in return. And I think that's the part of the conversation I want to end on, which is that in my experience, both being an immigrant in other countries and helping receive and love on immigrants here, I I have gained so much. And I know my mom would say the same. I know people like you who have been involved would say the same. It's not just that we're giving, it's that we also receive so much when we get into be involved in people's lives and see the incredible faith people have in the midst of very difficult circumstances. It inspires me to be a more loving, giving, caring person when I get out there and see how so many immigrants are those kinds of people and those stories they bring with them, what they're living here in America, 12-year-old girls being put to work and somehow still making a life here. And it's inspiring. We gain so much. So it's not just that we're doing it for them, but it's a reciprocal kind of relationship where we can all benefit. And when we see light dispelling the darkness like that, it gives us hope. And if there's anything we need right now in COVID and in difficult times, I think we need hope. And sometimes we can find it in the most unlikely places, which is in the life of someone who's come here believing with all kinds of hope that this can be a better place for them to work and raise their families, right?
Yeah.
Well, I would love for you to point people to where they can find more information about you, because I know you do a lot of writing. So would you point our listeners to where they can follow you and hear more about what you're trying to share?
Yeah, I don't really have one place. I used to have a website that I'll put things on, but it's kind of it's just kind of all over the place. I write for the Bulwark on occasion. I write for Religion News Service. I have author pages there. I've written for the New York Times, and I'm able to do that. I'm a big contributor for them from time to time. So those are the main places. That you can find me. I'm on Twitter, and you can find me there too. But just articles and things like that as I continue to speak. So.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're busy doing lots of things up in Marin County, and I just really appreciate you speaking to all my listeners and challenging them, but also just doing it from a heart of love and care and concern and wanting to receive people well. I just pray that God blesses you and all your efforts as you're here in California, still being that voice that we all need to listen to.
Yeah, Lori, and it's been good to know you for 20 something years now. I guess we're getting older. So, but I'm really glad you're doing the podcast. You've been just an amazing voice for many, many years, and your listeners are very blessed to have you talking about these things. So I'm really glad you are.
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the show. Say hi to your family.
Sure thing. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Well, I know you, like me, were challenged by some of the things that we heard my friend Alan talk about. And I just hope that these are the things that when they come into our minds and our hearts and our souls, and they find a place that didn't exist there before within us, maybe today there was some sort of invitation that was offered to you that you hadn't considered before. And if there's that space in your heart and your mind and your soul that is open to a new way of thinking that helps you go deeper into loving your neighbor better, to listening more, to wanting to find out what are some practical ways that you can help and be involved in either small ways or big ways or both. I know that Alan, mentioned some systemic ways he's helping, and then just some personal one-on-one ways he's helping immigrants to be welcome here. And if there is a part of your life that could be more welcoming in large or small ways, and you've kind of had some new thoughts about what that would look like today, I would just encourage you to go for it, to just move forward in that, and to not stay where it's comfortable when there's a chance to really reach out and be a welcoming neighbor, either to a next door neighbor or to someone within your city or just country. And for those of you in the United States of America, these are some really practical ways that Alan mentioned that you could help, which is to, just be an advocate even with the authorities in your own city, to find ways to just offer a helping hand. And there's a lot of resources out there, whether you do that through your church or you organize through your neighborhood or whatever spaces that you're in. But I would just encourage you to have these conversations with your loved ones, with your family and your friends, and bring people on board with you, because these kinds of opportunities just are everywhere. And I think Alan mentioned that so much of what happened last year was a real missed opportunity for those of us in the faith community. And we just don't want to miss it again. We don't want to miss that opportunity to be part of an invite culture and part of a nation and a neighborhood and a faith community and a household and a family and an individual who just is welcoming. I just know my life has been full of experiences of people in so many countries around the world who welcomed me. And the things that touched me the most were, Venezuelans who accepted me as part of their culture, even though my citizenship was not there, but just embracing me as one of their own, even today. And, Indonesian friends, even Muslim friends who accepted me as a follower of Jesus into their homes, fed me halal meals, and never saw me as a stranger who was dirty or unacceptable or different in such a way that they couldn't welcome me. And just the hospitality that it's been extended to me in Indonesia and Singapore and Venezuela and Costa Rica and other countries where I've traveled but not lived has just been life-changing and eye-opening. And I want to be that kind of neighbor, that kind of citizen who, now that I'm living in the country where I am a citizen, has a chance to be that one who goes out of my way to invite and to welcome and to accept and to love, even when I may have very different beliefs, very different foods that I eat or ways of living. I just know how it felt for me all these years, and for my kids and my parents, my brothers, for us to be so warmly welcomed and received. And I just encourage you to press into that today. If there's parts of that that are uncomfortable for you or you have questions, I would just encourage you to have those conversations with people who can help you work through it and find whatever ways you can be a part of it. Because it really does change a neighborhood, it changes a family, it changes a generation, it changes a nation when we just take that first step. And so I encourage you today to just make a plan of how that's going to look for you in the next year. There's just a lot of craziness in the United States of America and around the world. And COVID has made us feel more separate from each other in some ways than ever. And we do have to do things differently, but it doesn't mean we don't do them. We still find ways to reach out and be welcoming because it's the right thing to do. And because when we do that, it enriches us when we get to learn from and befriend those who are different. And that's what this podcast is about. It's about being different and making a difference in the world in small and big ways wherever we are. So chew on that for this week. Alan's given us a lot to think about. Follow him on Twitter. Read his book, When Heaven and Earth Collide. Read his articles in the New York Times and the different spaces where he's writing. And just think through those ideas for what it means for you and for those around you. Next week, we have a super exciting guest who lives in Chad. Yes, that's Chad, the country in the middle of Africa. If you don't know where it is, look it up on Google Maps before next week. Amanda Stillman is going to be our guest. She is the Africa Programs Director for Never Thirst, which is an organization that provides clean water in the form of wells for different countries in Africa and Asia where they work. They work with local partners, and she has been an immigrant most of her life and has known a lot of immigrants, worked with immigrants through the work that she does. And you're just going to hear some exciting stories. She speaks multiple languages and just has a real heart to make a difference in the world. And so we're going to hear her perspective on immigration and also just helping the poor and the different things that she's involved with now as an adult. But we'll probably dig a little bit into her childhood because I knew her when she was a little girl growing up in Indonesia. Was a friend of her parents and her and all her sisters. So tune in next week for Amanda Stillman, and have a great week, everybody. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.